Hello and welcome to The Appetite, a podcast from Opal Food and Body Wisdom, an eating disorder treatment program in Seattle, Washington. I'm your host, Carter Umhow, a therapist, artist, and writer, and I'm joined by the Opal founders,
Dr. Lexi Giblin,
Kara Bozzi,
Julie Church.
And today we're exploring the question, what is health? In the eating disorder and nutrition worlds, this question of health is always being posed. What is the healthiest way to eat? What is the healthiest diet? What would the healthiest exercise regimen be? These questions seem to be asking for a one-size-fits-all prescription, some sort of normative way of eating and being in the world that's going to set every person up for the same sort of success in their eating habits and lifestyle. Today, we challenge this prescriptive way of looking at health and explore body wisdom, pleasure, and how the rebalancing of our attention on not only body, but on mind and spirit can also be a determinant of health. Also, we're just demoralizing the issue of health in general here, refocusing the conversations on an appetite for life. So today we're talking about health kind of in general, answering the question, what is health? And we thought it would be really helpful to maybe start off by exploring some normative views or normative assumptions about what health is and what constitutes kind of a healthy person. Mm-hmm. Can any of you jump in with some ideas about that?
Mm-hmm. Well, I just thought I would share a funny little story that I was telling Julie and Lexi when we were walking over to the studio from yesterday. So I go to my coffee shop that I go to every day, waiting in line for my latte. And the woman ahead of me in line asks the barista, she looks at the pastry shelf and says, well, what is the healthiest thing in this pastry shelf that I can get? And was very serious, really wanted a serious answer from the barista. And I was sitting there just sort of amused, waiting to see what the barista, how she was going to respond to this question. Well, what is the healthiest? And I could kind of get, I know I have a relationship with this barista, so I was sort of imagining what she might be thinking. And of course, she is, customer service is important. And so she very seriously answered, well, maybe the Morning Glory muffin, because there's raisins and there's nuts and there's, different things like that in the Morning Glory muffin. This pastry shelf has the muffins, it has the scones, it has the donuts. And then she goes, or maybe the spinach and cheese. I don't even know if that was a scone. Maybe that. And so there was this really, serious conversation going on about what was going to be the healthiest pastry to pick. So I just couldn't help. I mean, I had a lot of other questions going on in my brain about what is health, what's the healthiest option in that pastry shelf. But I think that would be kind of a fun starting point.
And I love that this person thought that the barista was the expert.
Yeah, exactly.
And I love that we have Julie Church right here.
I know.
As the dietitian,
I know.
who is an actual expert.
Oh, wowzers.
Julie,
No
what is
pressure.
the healthiest pastry?
Oh,
Tell us.
Secret.
secret. It's different for everybody. That's a good summary there. But I think about her. I think I'm like, okay, well, in that moment, what is she accessing in her history?
The barista?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. What is she accessing in her history, in her learning about health that then she's interpreting? So I take that, the Morning Glory muffin thing, and she's like, oh yeah, nuts and fruit and nuts.
Those are good.
Those are good, right?
things.
Spinach, green leafy greens aren't those things that promote health? So I think I'm going to help this customer by saying that these pastries have these other components, right? I don't know.
Totally.
Like I was trying to kind of figure that out. And then how each of us might have a different response. Like you're saying, like, I wonder what other questions, like I would want to be like, oh, well, which one looks good to you? Or what would sound good to you? Have you eaten any of these before?
Mm-hmm.
I don't, yeah.
Which speaks to the fact that when there are more questions to ask, we're talking here a little bit more about body wisdom, which I think is an assumption that we need to kind of put out there too, right?
Sure.
That there might be, there's a lot of research saying, oh, you should eat this or you should do that, or you shouldn't eat that, whatever. And actually, one of the assumptions that we would make is that health would happen over a longer period of time, maybe, or you could get your nutrients over all of your meals in an entire month rather than in one pastry, right? That like,
Yes.
so there are other questions to ask that you could kind of get some answers to if you're thinking about other things rather than just the perfect answer in that moment to the pastry case.
Yes.
Or how do
Right.
you define health?
Right.
Right. I think that that's so different for each person. I, as a dietitian, do get the instant, I usually instantly can in a social situation get other people's perspectives on what is healthy from how they might interact with the fact that I'm a dietitian.
What do they normally say?
Well, especially if there's food around, but even
Yeah.
if there's not food around, but I just feel like they'll instantly be like, "Ooh, don't look at my plate." Oh, or "Oh, like what should I have? What should I get at this buffet?" Or
What are you eating?
"What are you
Yeah,
eating?"
exactly.
Sure,
Role model.
Yeah. And that is always puts me in this position of going, well, wait, I want to know more about you, like that inverse versus I have some expert stance, like some answer that says this and this and this. So therefore, that is universal for all human beings in every scenario that you should always pick that one pastry. I don't know, at a particular time in the day. So that,
Yeah. So again, back to this body wisdom thing.
yeah.
Like you're saying that health actually depends on your body.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know,
And who you
going
are.
to the pastry example, I think a lot of times people are asking what has the most maybe nutrient content. But to me, that doesn't equate to what's the healthiest decision because health for me goes way beyond nutrient content.
Right.
Where else does it lead?
Yeah.
Psychology. I mean, psychology for me is a huge one. I think also probably I'm biased from having had a past with an eating disorder, but I'm going to go way more on the pleasure side of making decisions and less about nutrient as the definition of what's healthy.
And that's one aspect of being connected to one's body, right? Is like knowing what tastes good. And I think it's okay also that some people are also looking at it going, oh, like this settles well in my body, or like
Right.
digestively is something that's going to last and have more sustenance that's going to get me through to my lunch or my snack or something like that. So like those kinds of personal experiences with a particular food or food item or meal time or whatever, that then they can decide, oh, this is the thing that's going to be quote unquote healthy for me. Like this is the thing that's going to provide me with what I have or what I want or need in this moment. And it actually makes me go, okay, well, I have done the practice of having my clients come back to me in earlier sessions and then say in our work together and say, okay, well, come back to me with a decision with your own definition of what is healthy. And that could mean practices, like what are their lifestyle habits, or like what would they think constitutes a healthy life? And then also just, what is healthy? So then they're probably going to come with also a list of things to eat, things to do. And that's always helpful for me because what is healthy? It's a very commonly used word. And I think most of the time there's sort of this normative belief that we're all in agreement. And that's the thing that's always hard for me as a dietitian, because it's like, we're all in agreement on what is healthy. And I'm like, oh, wait, don't throw me in that camp, because I want you to see this possibly as more nuanced than the fact that maybe there's this New York Times article that one day or something that everyone then is jumping on board with avocados or something. And so, of course, like...
We all believe avocados are
the thing. And I guess I could expand on sort of more of the mind-body connection, but I really do think that health has to be mind, body, and spirit. And so for Kara, she's talking about pleasure, and in those moments, she's going to make a decision for herself that then is going to benefit both her body and her psychology, mental health and physical health.
Which is, I remember when having kids, that was a little trickier for me because my decisions were much more pleasure based. And then I remember having a conversation with Julie when my kids were starting to eat solid foods and just like, oh, now interesting. I'm having to rethink some of that of nutrient content and what my kids need. And I remember going through a little struggle with that because of the way I just leaned into so much trust. But then I was thinking parenting, can I do that with parenting? And it took me some exploration to figure that out because for some reason that was a harder jump for me when I was thinking about it for my kids and feeding my kids.
That makes a lot of sense because, if you've kind of broken apart your own assumptions or your own way of thinking about health or how to eat or what to eat, And then suddenly you have to start making decisions on behalf of someone else
Exactly.
who has had no experience yet defining these things or trying everything or can't actually be trusted yet to be tuned into their own bodies. Then it kind of brings you back to this question of, well, what would be the right balance?
Mhm.
And it sounds like there is some answer to that,
Mhm.
a starting point at least.
Mhm.
Would you say that?
Yeah. I think that the basic, I would say basic belief that is out there and pretty universally believed that in terms of infant feeding,
Mhm.
that there's some foods that you start with that are least allergen and like slowly introduced.
Yeah.
And then as you do that, you need to just make sure there's a lot of variety. And you bring in, I think one of the things I like as actually a principle that I think takes you into adulthood too is that you bring in unfamiliar foods with familiar foods. And
Ooh,
I like
that too.
I like that. Just even when we get introduced to unfamiliar things, maybe not just only food, but unfamiliar foods, that then we also can serve them with things that are familiar. And we're going to have more susceptibility to perhaps taking some risks with it if we have we know we're going to get nourished and satisfied by the foods that are familiar. But anyways, I think that, and each culture and family and community are going to have different foods that are the normative beginning foods for early early introduction of solid foods for kids too. And I love that too. We can look at it as dietitians and look at the macronutrients and micronutrients and go, oh yeah, they're going for main, like carbohydrates. They're getting that one as one of the initial foods. And then all these micronutrients that are getting in there too with the vegetables. But how they do it it's always so fascinating to see that it's done so differently around the world and within our own communities with just diversity. So.
That reminds me of what we talked about in our last episode with athletes training. And you gave an example, Kara, of someone going to a competition in a different country and suddenly realizing like, oh, this is what someone eats before a race?
Right.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Different norms, different needs based off of maybe what's normal for them or what they're used to or...
Right. They can work with a particular set of assumptions about maybe what is healthy or what their body needs. But then sometimes if they take a risk and try something different, they might learn something new.
Right.
Yep.
And that's where I also think of, it's hard not to think of psychological flexibility and the connection to RODBT with health too. I think a lot of people start down the path of what is healthy and they might have really good intentions to listen to their bodies or to pay more attention to self-care. And then if they happen to have more of an OC temperament, they can just start to quickly get more and more deeply in where then they're more rule-bound and getting more rigid. And then it starts to become a problem. I mean, that's often how an eating disorder can start, is people's attempts to quote unquote be healthy.
Yeah. And that's what I found with when clients will come back with the list of what is healthy, then most of the time they aren't complying to that 100%. So then they come also with that, oh, I don't know if I want to show you this, or these are all the things. Well, do you want to know what I think is healthy or what I'm doing right now? Or like it's this kind of conflict. And that's sometimes hard to kind of, come face to face with, I guess, right? Of like, well, maybe our belief is this, but then what about that? And I'm always trying to help them determine what it is for them, right? And like what actually works for them, what's practical, what's economical, what's matches their flavor, interest, and their lifestyle and their cultural, ethnic background, like all those things to go, okay, that actually is quote unquote healthy. And I have a hard time using the word healthy just normally in a sentence. You can tell that. Like, quote unquote healthy.
Yes.
Right.
Do you ask the question? Because I know one of the questions on that psychological side would be, what happens if you don't do X, the healthy behavior? What happens if you miss it one time? There's a lot, I feel like, of information in that. Do you ask that? Is that a regular question with?
Yeah, I mean, I think I
dietitian?
come face to face with that often in the way that they're then presenting what they are doing or what they're not doing and the conflict they're having. Because, and depending on where each person is, but I think that I'm always trying to just start with the basics of like, are you nourishing yourself and are you getting adequate nutrition? Because that is where I tend to think like, can you make even good, sound decisions for yourself if you're not nourished enough? And and I think the other thought, like I could go that track, but I also
pause you for a
Yes,
second
do
though,
it, do
because
it.
I feel like there are a couple of things that maybe not everyone would understand about that.
Okay.
Right? That like there's a point of at which you aren't maybe nourished enough for your brain to be functioning fully, right? To be in touch with your actual needs or to be emotionally regulating. I mean, your body's being impacted by not being nourished, but so is your brain.
Yeah.
So is your emotional life as well.
Right.
Can you say more about that?
I mean, I think the main thing I would say is that, yes, our brain, I feel like I just said that in another podcast. Oh, it was a part of the athlete one, I think. But just that the brain needs so many nutrients. And carbohydrates are one of the main sources of energy for our brain. And then fats. So there are essential fats that we have to eat, or else our brain doesn't have all the needed fats. So we have to take in a wide variety of types of foods to be able to have our brain be functioning well enough. But even in, like, if you then say, okay, one of the things our brain helps with is making decisions. And I think emotional regulation is the other thing that I think about so often. But even in just making decisions, and I think with so many people come wanting their food relationship to look differently, and they are going to blame themselves or their inability or their lack of willpower to not live into what their health values are. And I just often will kind of take the step back to go, okay, you might believe that, but if your brain isn't nourished well enough, you're going to do some impulsive things or compulsive things and things that are outside of the realm of that just to get the calories in that you need. And where then I would say that that's the diet. One of the main consequences of dieting, right, is not having that clear mind. And then the cycle of that just then leading to have people believe that that's the kind of eater they are. To believe that they're that kind of eater, that they're so out of control, they don't know what to do with themselves. And that's what's always so discouraging to me. And I love using the Ancel Keys study that talks about the starvation. There was an actual study of people in Minnesota that actually semi-starved these men. And a lot of the consequences of that semi-starvation was things that we see exhibited in disordered eating and eating disorders.
And that's the study that inspired our name, The Appetite.
Oh.
Yeah, I don't know if you remember that, but I'm that's a good
great.
thing to
Where was I in that conversation?
It was an email. But one of the things that, inspired the name The Appetite is this idea that if you are actually nourished enough to be thinking about, what do I genuinely want? What does my body desire? What does my mind desire, my spirit, et cetera? Like if you're able to tap in and all those systems are go, right? You're answering a question. Appetite is a question to be answered. I think that study says, rather than this desperation of black and white thinking of I need to do this or I should do this or I need this now or I can't have that at all or snapping because you're hangry, right? But really being well nourished means that you can answer those questions with nuance about what you want.
The question I'd have for you then, Julie, for listeners, maybe if somebody isn't intentionally dieting, how would they know if they're not eating adequately? If it's not so obvious that they're having the symptoms like the men in the Ancel Keys
more extreme symptoms
study. Yeah. So, I mean, I would imagine there's a lot of unintentional inadequate eating.
Yeah.
Tons.
What were you going to say, Lexa?
Well, I was just thinking about my own my own first 25 years of eating.
Okay, great.
And I think my diet was limited to probably 6 or 7 foods, and hamburgers, French fries, pizza, mac and cheese, then grilled cheese. Like I had I was very rigid and very over controlled about it. I didn't like new novelty, I don't think, in my food, and so I learned to, try new things, and I'm a different. I eat more variety now, but man, 25 years. My parents had a battle with me. But I was just thinking about how maybe, but then my body there was never any health concerns. I mean, I never had any concerns that would be connected to that diet. And I haven't yet that I know of.
Yeah.
That's
I love
never
that
been,
though, because I think there's so much heightened anxiety about needing to eat the right way in order to have, even as parents, to feed the kids the right way. And then as young adults to try to figure out the right way to feed oneself, and just to hear that there's so many people that eat that way in in youth, and just that familiar food thing. So I love that because you got the macronutrients that you needed and most of the micronutrients that you needed also. You weren't missing. I mean,
I must have. I mean, I
mostly,
must have because I
Yeah.
didn't ever have
Yeah.
a big consequence in
Yeah.
any known way. I
Would
worry
you
about
say
my
you-
sport, though.
Yeah. Would you say you were inadequately? Were you getting enough fuel, do you think?
I assume I was getting enough.
all that
fuel.
swimming you were doing at that time.
I was getting enough. Yeah, the swimming. I worry that maybe
Yeah.
I could have my performance
been better
was-
at swimming.
There's a consequence to my performance.
Uh-huh.
Maybe
And
I've
you-
always wondered that.
Mm.
Because when we've talked to high school, when we went, I remember we went and
Yeah.
spoke to the Roosevelt distance running team.
It's a high school, local high school.
Yeah, high school distance cross country running team. That we had shown kind of a sample plates of what more adequate eating would look like, and the girls were just like aghast. They couldn't believe how much food it was, and they weren't intentionally not eating enough. They
Right.
just didn't know.
Yeah.
It's so interesting.
I
So,
think I was probably eating adequately and attuned to the adequacy issue, but I wasn't attuned to probably maybe other
Yeah.
cravings my body
Yeah.
may have been having.
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't. I don't think I had. And my mom and dad, you can attest to this. I think fruits and vegetables. I don't think I ate until 25.
yeah.
I mean, if I was forced, I would. My
Yeah.
mom would put sugar on bananas, and I would sometimes eat those.
Yeah.
But never, And so far, I don't know of any health consequences.
Sure.
So was I healthy?
Yeah.
Would you consider me healthy then?
But
Back
then,
when I was
did
20?
with your burger, did you have lettuce and tomato on your burger, and then in your pizza sauce?
Probably took it
I
off.
learned- Your pizza
Deep
sauce has
scowl.
tomato,
Tomato.
right?
No.
The
Pizza
pizza
sauce.
pizza has all of the
Yes, I
Yeah,
had that.
pizza's
on
very
there.
balanced.
Yes,
It's very balanced.
I
Get-
did
get-
have that.
Yeah.
Macaroni.
I mean, I think back to Kara's question around with Lexi as an example.
our case study.
A case study here. This is new. I have never heard Lexi say all this, so
I
I'm
know.
like, great. I can like interact with
Yeah.
live here.
Yeah.
Is that okay? So what would be the signs of if you weren't feeding yourself well enough? And I think that's the thing. Maybe there's the nuances of sport performance, but in general, like sleep and your ability to socially interact and like growth, right? Growth patterns is a pretty key thing
Yeah.
to look for if somebody is getting well nourished enough.
I've thought about that.
yeah.
Could I have been taller?
Lexi's
She's
tall.
5'11".
I was, I think, 5'9", 5'10" when I was
Yeah.
a ninth grader.
Okay,
So
Sure. maybe.
I think I
Maybe
was
you
growing
would've
adequate.
grown.
I could have been a 6'1", 6'2".
I could look at your childhood growth grids and see if you were following the trend, and if there was a little pause there, we could look at that. But I think the hope is that you were listening to your body, that there was nothing that got in the way of you being able to listen to those cues to then get the food that you needed, right? And that's, I think, when I think of the girls at this local high school, I just think that the food culture and the health culture has changed.
Yeah,
and
true.
we're in Seattle, Washington versus rural Kansas. So I'm
Yes,
just going to
good
put that out
point.
there.
Right.
So the confusion around what is healthy at rural Kansas back when you were young, there was probably one message and there was probably not a lot of pressure around that. I mean, maybe you got some pushback about this isn't that healthy, but then would you be outed from communities or be looked upon by your friends' parents all the time negatively? I think
there
here
wasn't as much
you know?
morality around
No,
it in the
no.
70s, 80s
No.
in Kansas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in
Yeah.
the current age in Seattle, there's
Yeah.
a ton of that. So I just think those girls, or boys too, right? They were both looking at those plates of food and seeing what is needed. I think that some of the things is not being able, like people are disconnected from their appetite cues and what works. Yes,
And
Kara.
interestingly, the case study from Roosevelt, then we go 2 years later,
Yes.
and adequacy was not, we brought the same kind of plates of foods and had a whole different response with 120 athletes. And this time, the adequacy was there. They weren't shocked. That looked like kind of normal plates of foods for them. But then all the questions around supplementation. So it's interesting. Like, I mean, I know this is not
Supplementation meaning what?
taking supplements. That
Oh.
they had like
Pills
probably
or
10
pills,
questions
okay.
about taking supplements. And that if they
Smoothies,
needed the
powders.
supplements to get the all the
Okay.
nutrition they needed for
Oh.
sport performance, that they weren't trusting food gave them.
And this, I have an awesome study that came out of kind of like sideways out of this researcher in Montana that was studying firefighters. And I love this. So he was pretty adamant against a lot of the food products that are out there that are supposed to be promoting health and helping us have easier access to the nutrients that give health. Okay. And he was like, oh, I think people are spending too much money on that. And he also was wanting to see how much fuel do firefighters need. So he was looking at this very high intensity population. They're very equal to endurance athletes and things like that in terms of what their body needs and how much they're pushing it to their limits. And they fed a group a lot of more of the, I would say, more scientifically engineered foods. So some of more of the supplemental world, but nutrition bars and smoothies and protein shakes and things like that. And, among some other food too. But then the other group ate McDonald's entirely.
Interesting.
And they found that the people that ate McDonald's entirely were the ones that actually had more of the sustained energy and had more ability to kind of stay with their. So there you go. That's where those hamburgers fit in, Lexi. But I love that study because I think it just really names the. There's a lot of, there was actually satisfaction talked about too by the participants, and I've always talked about that, like a nutrition bar in comparison to peanut butter sandwich. I mean, a peanut butter sandwich is way more enjoyable than some nutrition bar that's packed into like 4 inches.
Right.
Another little funny anecdote. My grandpa lived to 96, and I don't think he ever did vegetables. And he was bread all the way. He had so much toast. And he lived to 96 and just died of old age and was like one of the healthiest, quote, healthiest.
Yes, there's still so much question, actually. I mean, as much as we can kind of come out with new things of like add in acacia berry or do avocado or have kale, like there's still actually at the micronutrient level, it's like, well, if it was just nutrients, we would just take vitamins and be okay, right? But there's like other components to food, and then maybe there's other components to eating, right? And the experience of eating and the whole interaction with that then allows for us to actually be well. And so.
Yeah, that feels like a really interesting category to me because I think that it's always been more satisfying to me if there's a food that I feel like I have some sort of relationship with.
Yeah.
Or some story with, or reminds me of so-and-so, or I tried it and cooked it with this person at some point. And I don't ever, a peanut butter sandwich that you make yourself or someone else makes you or whatever is just like so much more interesting, even if you've had it all the time, than a Cliff Bar to me.
Yeah.
Maybe not, but yeah.
The stories matter. Satiating.
Right.
In both taste and experience and broader.
Yeah. And I think that's where, it comes to sort of that mind, body, spirit definition of health versus absence of disease health. So that's definition of, from the Webster Dictionary, right? It's absence of disease. But I want more than that for health. It's not just absence of disease.
I don't feel like people actually treat that word that way, though, right? Because we would I think we'd stop talking about it, really. Like, culturally, if it was just absence of disease, because people
it's
are
not
obsessed
as exciting.
with maximizing health.
Right.
And obsessed with trying to figure out all these tiny little things that they can change so that they're like,
I know.
I mean, it's kind of crazy.
Like reach nirvana.
What is the goal?
Right.
To live longer?
Yeah.
Is that the reason we're all so concerned about health?
Great question.
That is a great question.
Yeah.
I think that one thing that comes to mind is aesthetics. People are actually, that's a big part of why people are obsessed with that. Not just aesthetics in terms of weight, but also like glowing skin. Such an aesthetic.
Vibrant.
That's true. Okay.
Yeah, looking vibrant
If
and your hair's healthy and all these things that are probably somewhere in our biology to want to be attractive or something as well, or some desire toward that, or just vanity. It could be, gosh, I don't even know. I had lost my thought.
I mean, the risk of, I was thinking more, if it is risk of premature death, right? Like living longer life. But being able to live life to the fullest is the thing I would say is like being able to ski into their 70s. Like, I don't know. That's the thing that I
reaching mountaintop experiences.
I might.
With that.
What'd you say?
Like at my age now, I'm starting to connect with health for totally different reasons than I maybe would have thought about it. I think I want to be around for this event and I want to feel I want to be able to move around still and like my motivation to do health behaviors, things that feel like they're life promoting are different than maybe they would have been in the past. I'm very concerned about that now. all
Like
of a sudden.
avoiding limitations, like
I
minimizing as
don't
many
want to
limitations.
be alive and be severely limited in some
Yes.
way, or
In the way
not
we
get
can
to
move.
experience something,
My-
some bucket list idea or
Totally.
experience, you know.
My dad, who loves to travel, he always says that he is still trying to work on his health because he wants to be able to lift a suitcase in an overhead compartment when he travels. That like that's his goal.
Basic,
yeah,
yeah.
he's like,
Very
I want to be the
specific.
guy that's on the plane that can like do that on his own still and can like go somewhere and feel self sufficient in that way. And you know, I kind of like how
Totally.
specific it is for him.
I have a
And that-
specific one. I continue to strengthen my muscles because I want to be in the Amazing Race.
Ooh, let's get you in there.
Kara, bringing the amazing
You
race.
know, difference between an amazing race and being able to carry a suitcase. I mean,
my really strong
fantastical
hope
thing.
I can get on the show. It's worth it.
Yeah,
it's
we can
worth
plug it.
for the one in a
Plugging
million
it now.
chance that I can get on.
It's 1 in a million.
Oh, you know, I mean, there's
I
tons
think
of
it's less
people
than
applying.
that, but you could do it. Yeah. I mean,
Well, and
so-
when you like with my foot issue that I'm
Yeah.
having, when you have health taken away in some
Yeah.
way, how all of a sudden becomes this precious. I mean, I've been in a
Yeah.
privileged experience with health.
Yeah.
Until just recently. So now all of a sudden whoa, there's a whole nother world here.
It's for reals.
Yeah.
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 Well, and I know I feel like I'm drawn to thinking about what are the other things that impact health because we've talked a lot about food.
right.
And in a lot of ways, and in a lot of ways, I like to talk about health. I want to move people away from the conversation around weight being a predictor of health, but also diet and exercise being the most important lifestyle habits and most important factors in one's health. So
Do you want to
anyone
talk
feel
more
passionate
about
about
weight or no?
we can. I mean, I think for me, just naming, even when you say that, like, you've been in this privileged position, I just think of, okay, there are so many factors that impact one's ability to even access health, right? So when I think of social determinants of health being such this broad things that we can talk about food, sure, as being something that impact health, but so does education and so does sort of proximity in a community or like kind of the environment somebody is in or economic stability or instability, right? Socioeconomic status. And then just some of the complexities around the healthcare system and access in that way too, and how one would be treated based on race, size, age. So those other
From
determinants.
genetics, right? This would go back to
Yeah.
the,
Yeah.
oh, that's social determinants. So I
Well,
guess
that's-
that's not,
yeah, I guess I'm
but the
saying more
things we
social
can control
determinants.
and not control, right? Again, going back to that too.
Right. It is, yeah, genetics do fit into the categories and that we can't control. But that's one of the things with the social determinants of health that is these big system-wide things that impact all of us. And so some people do come to maybe a conversation like this thinking, wow, I have so many things stacked against me to be able to allow for myself to access health. And that's where then the definition of what is healthy for each individual person, to me, feels like it has to be more varied than
Yeah.
the lack of, absence of disease or even I think within the medical literature, you're going to be looking at cardiometabolic health. So looking at certain lab values within one's blood markers that they're getting, around their blood pressure or their lipid profile or their insulin resistance or things like that, that really, for a lot of people, I think that's what a lot of people are going for when they're talking about health, is they want an absence of those things being out of whack. But does everybody have the right to that? Or is that something that some other factors, these social determinants of health, that just like set some people up to kind of be in a category that they may not actually have?
Yeah. I think evolutionarily, I'm thinking about this, like we might want to be outpacing each other in a way, like this idea of wanting to survive longest and
Okay.
our obsession with that. And when you're talking about that, and I'm imagining people all having this varied genetics, varied lives, varied access, et cetera. Some of that, the access issue for sure, feels like something that we should actually think and talk about and help people get more access. But otherwise, I wonder too if the definition can shift a little bit. Like we do want to live a while. Most people do.
Most people do.
Most people do. Not everybody does.
Yep.
But assuming that that's the main goal, or assuming that that's supposed to look a certain way, or that you're not supposed to die, feels like it's sort of. I mean, we are.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
we're going to, and we're not invincible.
Right.
So I think that there's sort of an obsession with the idea that we could figure out the right recipe,
Yeah.
no pun intended, to figure out like how we can could live the longest, be the
Yeah.
best.
Life.
Yeah.
I was thinking about that too, about maybe our obsession with death is an expression of our obsession with health is an expression of death anxiety.
Totally.
Oh,
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Totally.
And that we might be more susceptible to one disease over the other because of our genetics, right?
Yeah.
And
Right.
that could be really painful and horrible in our lives.
Mm-hmm. To just come to.
And are we also not addressing the issue of we can't fix it all
Mm-hmm.
too?
Yeah. The things we don't have control over.
Exactly.
I know.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we have I feel like you're so right. We've focused mostly on food. We've talked about exercise. We haven't talked about weight a ton. But I also feel curious too around like the impact of stress, trauma on the body, and those things actually impacting your health, and relationships that are chaotic, and how that impacts your stress and impacts your health, and all these other things. And it's complex.
Yeah.
It's really
It
complex.
is. Yeah.
But I do think that were you gonna say something?
It's okay.
I do think that probably most people that have heard us talking about food already might be wondering, well, but what about the weight?
Yeah.
I think that
Yeah.
that does feel important to talk about that a little
I
bit.
know. Yeah, I'm happy to. I mean, I think the mainstream belief is that in a conversation around health, that having somebody aim towards being in a smaller size body or according to the BMI fit into the normal weight category on the BMI would be something that would prevent somebody from having more illness or disease and therefore be a healthier, quote unquote, healthier person. That is certainly a mainstream belief. So I push back on that in my work with my clients, and then also just broadly in conversation and trying to get the message out there. And
What would you give us? Give us some bullets
start?
about where a few
Yes.
that we won't be able to get to
Okay.
more extensively. But
Yeah.
how about a few of
Yeah.
things?
I think the one of the main messages that is important to have, I think, be across when we think about health and then bringing in weight in the conversation around health is that the BMI is being misused a lot. And recently, actually, in 2016, in the International Journal of Obesity, there was a study that was a compilation study that showed that there was misclassification of cardiometabolic health when using the BMI. So what does that mean? It showed that, okay, if we take this belief that somebody that is in the normal weight category is going to be healthier than the people that are in an overweight or obese category, we are going to misclassify millions of people. So they took NHANES data from 2005 to 2012, and they analyzed that data, and they found that if you just universally said people in normal category are healthy and the people that are in the obese category are unhealthy, that there were 74 million U.S. adults that were misclassified, right? So were put into the wrong category. So people in the normal weight category that were actually cardiometabolically unhealthy. And I think it was 40% that should have been in the unhealthy category or something. I shouldn't start with the stats because I'm bad with that when it comes to numbers. But then many people, also a high percentage that were in the obese category actually were metabolically healthy, cardiometabolically healthy. So I just think we have to challenge our assumptions and move beyond the basic belief that we can look across the room and decide that that person, if they have a larger size body or a smaller size body, fit in some sort of health category. And I think it's when it's easy for us. I think we hear a lot of research that does back it up that, oh, well, but weight loss does lead to improved in health, right? And I don't want to disagree with all the research on that either, because the reality is that we can find thousands of research studies that do back up the fact that when somebody loses weight, there is an improvement in health. And but one of the things often.
Yeah.
But those studies don't acknowledge, and they don't factor in, what about fitness? What about activity? What about nutrient intake? What about weight cycling and the impact of that, or other social determinants of health like socioeconomic status? So they're not going to factor in those things. And they're also very short term. So you look at these thousands of studies and then you would go, oh, okay, so this person improved they lost weight and they had some sort of improvement in health. But then if you were to follow that person over the course of their lifetime, that person is more likely to be somebody that's a chronic dieter or have a weight cycling pattern. And there's more and more research. And people that diet end up being in larger size bodies. And then the most current research is about coming out around so much about health impact of size discrimination and weight stigma on people. So then you've got all of these unintended consequences of the well-intended effort to help that person back in that study, right? To then say, well, we're trying to help this person be well.
Yeah.
But then there's all of the cascading negative impacts when we focus on weight.
Mm-hmm. And just to take it to a personal story, back when I had my eating disorder in college, and when I went to go see my doctor, I had lost my period. I'd become a menoriac. And I had a long-term relationship with my OBGYN, and she was because I'm in a thin body and because I was so active as a distance runner, she just normalized the loss of my period and said, she told me I was really healthy. Wow. And of course I didn't want to out myself that I wasn't eating enough, but the fact that I lost my period, it got normalized from a doctor I trusted. And, I think she's very well-meaning and well-intentioned, but it's an example of how by being in a thin body, a lot of my health concerns could be overlooked. And now I'm much more of an advocate when I go into the doctor because I don't want the bias of looking at my body and seeing that it's in the normal range and then not having anything looked at.
Yeah. Yeah, you do have to advocate, but in all these different categories, everybody usually has to advocate.
Right.
Right. A lot can be projected onto a body, large or small, around those things. Then it can be confirmation bias. Yeah.
And yet we give so much trust. It's interesting. I mean, not to bash doctors, but just the trust we give in doctors, right? As experts and people that we can lean into to give us the right advice and recommendations.
Yeah. And I think that's the recommendation usually is sound. I think that the follow-up or the markers of improvement is if it's centered on weight as the marker of improvement of somebody's health, that's where we can go awry. Because sure, there's for a medical provider to give advice around maybe some of these, you mentioned, Carter, relationships or stress level, or diet or exercise, like maybe they're going to give some sound advice or thoughts on that. And if the person is looking for weight loss as a result of it, as the marker of their health improvement, that's where it gets really concerning. So yeah, that's where I think it's well-meaning, right? Like I still think it's really well-meaning. And I find myself still, when I interact with providers about this topic, there's a lot of resistance because they're like, and what next, right? Well, what then? And I feel for a lot of the systems that we're up against, because if providers only have 8 minutes to be with a particular patient, what's the intervention that's most important? And that's I think that the short, quick to the moment, message around nutrition and exercise isn't the most important quick message, because I think that's one of those it's kind of, wouldn't the patient look back and go, I've been told that a million times and I'm coming here to get the next level of help. Like I have tried that, or I am doing that, perhaps too, right? I am doing that, but they're still maybe not getting the next level of support, possibly based on some weight bias if they're coming in a larger size body. That's concerning, right?
Yeah. And some of that might mean, at least around relationship to food or to exercise, could mean helping people understand this sort of psychological component of there's not a prescription that you just need to lose this weight or do this exercise and it's going to be great after that. But, maybe you would enjoy, maybe your body would enjoy some more movement, but then does your body tongue-tied. Do you start becoming compulsive about that? And then what happens? Or do you start really seeking out healthy foods, quote unquote healthy foods, and then you're obsessive and rigid about that, right? Yeah. So again, what are these psychological components, relational components that need to be factored in a long-term way so that all of that can be well integrated into someone's life, so they're not just focused on one aspect of their health, if it's something in that category.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, in the nature of kind of sending some people that have been listening off with some good questions to be asking themselves, I think we've certainly posed some today just in conversation. But Julie, did you have a couple too that you feel like would be good things for people to ponder?
Yeah. I think one of them is just that maybe you as a listener have maybe heard something that's been in conflict with an assumption you came in about what you believe about health or how you have always thought about health. And I think that at least for my journey, and I think for all of us in this room, that's been part of our thing of like, running into something that runs into a belief that then, wait, that's an assumption? That's not based on something that's real. And I would just encourage you, if that's true for you, that you would take a pause and actually maybe think through a timeline of where did you learn that belief and what have you done with it? Sort of how have you followed through with that belief and all the different places you've learned about it and been reinforced, if it's people or different educational environments, and then decide what you decide about it. And I know we'll have probably a lot of resources in the notes for this show to be able to give possible follow-up reading on the topic too, if you want to look deeper into some of those assumptions. But that would be, I think the timeline work is really great. Asking yourself, where did you learn that first?
Yeah.
So
I like that idea about the timeline. And I would also want to add to this idea of moralization of health. I think that we just kind of threw that in there at some point in here. But is there some assumption that you have that is maybe based off of some kind of moralizing that's happening culturally or some sort of system, maybe even of oppression that we're all kind of internalizing and participating in? Once you break that down, is there a way that you can find wisdom about some of your questions or some of these assumptions that might get you more connected to your body? Yeah.
And then the other one, I would have the other question. I think it would just be that if there is something that maybe you have dismissed, kind of in what Carter's saying, like maybe you've dismissed that thing that you thought wasn't health promoting because something in the culture has said it wasn't, but for you it really works. Like it really works for you to eat this in one certain way or move your body this certain way or engage in communities in this way or whatever. It's just maybe that is health promoting for you. And you've dismissed it. Maybe to try to connect to that and come back to that and maybe honor that as your own, an aspect of your own health and respect that.
Stick
Your
to
own
that
food and body
intuition.
wisdom and your own intuition there.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thanks so much for listening and exploring the question of what is health with us. If you have any follow-up questions about today's episode or any others, or simply just want to reach out, send us an email at theappetite@opalfoodandbody.com. We would love to hear from you. Thank you to Jack Straw Cultural Center for sound engineering, to Aaron Davidson for the Appetite's music, and to Sarah Taylor for production assistance and editing. You can learn more about Opal at opalfoodandbody.com and feel free to connect with us on Facebook or Twitter. Subscribe and you'll easily find our next episode. Talk to you soon.